All right, Matt, what are the numbers on the beach?
Okay, so according to Best Ever Albums in the 1970s, this comes in at number 51, number 3 in the year 1974, number 207 overall, and it did make Rolling Stone's list. It comes in at number 311 with Rolling Stone. And this is Neil Young's actually, and Best Ever Albums. It's his third highest ranked album behind After the Gold Rush and Harvest, and it does rank ahead of Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, another album that we covered.
Do you think, Matt, that if we waited a couple weeks, it would go down, down, or would it stay where it is at 311? I'm sorry.
His face is priceless.
Continue.
Josh, what do you have on this?
All right, On the Beach, released July 19th, 1974. We last covered Neil Young's previous album, Harvest, last album proper that we covered, Harvest, was on episode 17, and we covered Tonight's the Night on Coldest and Hot Takes, which was actually last Coldest and Hot Takes. So, as we mentioned before, especially when we talked about Tonight's the Night in Coldest and Hot Takes, this was considered a dark period in Neil Young's life, and these three albums, which include Time Fades Away, which is a live album, On the Beach, and Tonight's the Night, they are known as the Ditch Trilogy. After the success of Harvest in 1972, another tour had been planned with the Stray Gators, and as a reminder, those are the supporting musicians from Nashville that he used and backed him on Harvest, along with Crazy Horse drummer Danny Whitten was supposed to be on the tour. And however, Danny was kicked out of the band due to his drug use and his, basically inability to perform or play or even like get it together on stage or in the studio. And then almost right after, it seems like pretty much right after he was kicked out of the band, within a day or two, November 18th, 1972, he was found dead of a alcohol drug overdose. And so this, combined with the previous death of one of his roadies, kind of put Neil in a dark place. Also due to the fact that, the success of Harvest, the big success of Harvest, Neil pretty much like did not want to be famous or did not like kind of the fame that brought. He's very much of that ilk with, Pearl Jam and people who don't really want to be famous. They just want to play the music. That's the impression I get, at least. And, so, after the death and everything, they went on tour anyway, and Neil Young felt responsible for Danny's death, as he has said so in interviews. And the results of this tour can be found on the Time Fades Away live album. A little digression about that. Neil Young is one of those guys who you can look at it and say it's a live album. And, it's stuff you've heard before, but no, Neil Young puts new stuff on live albums, and the entire tour was pretty much new material. And Time Fades Away, you should not overlook, because it's another part of, essential Neil Young. And for those completists out there, he has so much material and albums and things and archives, and you have to listen to all of it if you are interested.
Did you listen to it, Josh?
I did. I kind of skimmed through it, so I listened to half of every song almost, I think, and it's good. It's as quality as the other Neil Young albums that we listened to.
I'm just looking at the track listing. I don't know any of these songs by name.
Yep. And then, so yeah, Time Fades Away was that, and while on tour for that album and, in general, he struggled with his voice, which I think we also mentioned when we talked about Tonight's the Night. He also had issues with drummer Kenny Buttree's playing, and so he was replaced by CSNY's Johnny Barbata on drums, and Crosby and Nash also appeared on the final part of that tour. All of this was on Time Fades Away, which Young describes as his least favorite record, and I think his voice. No, I didn't get an elaboration on that. I think just kind of the headspace more than anything, if I had to conjecture.
And that's a bold statement because he's got a lot of albums, so that's his least favorite.
I don't. It depends on when that quote is too. I guess.
Right.
He probably also has 20 albums after that.
He also has a lot of headspace, so that's an interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think his voice sounds fine on that. I didn't really notice any difference. So, this was the first of the 3 albums that were also not commercially successful. Hence the kind of the reiteration of the Ditch trilogy. They all show his inner conflict and negative feelings on display. As I mentioned before, Tonight's the Night, which we covered on Cold Listen Hot Take, was actually recorded before On the Beach, but released after due to the label not liking how dark and non-harvesty it was. So chronologically, just, because I've been throwing a lot of albums out there, it's in order of recording, it's Time Fades Away, Tonight's the Night, On the Beach, and then another album called Homegrown, which was actually an album he recorded that he decided to shelve and not release at all, and then didn't actually come out until June of 2020. So
it was more like the Ditch Weed as opposed to the Homegrown.
I thought Tonight's the Night came out after this. After On the Beach.
It was released after, but it wasn't. It was recorded before On the Beach. So there's kind of a lot of weird
that's
time
like the
shuffling due the studio and stuff.
Yeah, that's like the Abbey Road Let It Be deal. Got it.
By the way, there are a remarkable amount of similarities in this bio and what I'm going to be talking about with Bowie. Just file that away. Yeah.
Yep. Homegrown was an acoustic album, all acoustic, that he was mostly written after his breakup with Carrie Snodgrass, and it was also dark in tone, so thematically the same. And he just decided, as we mentioned before, sometimes he just zags when people expect him to zig, and he just shelved it, even though it was mostly complete. And so that's why it was released as part of his archives in June of last year. So, On the Beach was recorded while the record label's waiting to figure out their shit and decide what to do about Tonight's the Night and all of that. And this is his 5th studio album. He was very much against the success of Harvest, as I mentioned, and this was recorded in kind of a rougher manner with not much production polish. I think you can hear that on the album. And he used a variety of session musicians and really didn't give them much direction during the making of it, which frustrated some of them. This is mostly an acoustic album, or a mix as usual, and during the recording, Young and other musicians drank/ate a mix of sauteed marijuana and honey, which they called honey slides. And he said it
marijuana
sounds good.
Yeah, and he said it was like heroin. So that's where he was at. I can't imagine that being. I don't know.
So
I spent
marijuana
too much. I spent too
honey
much time thinking about how that would be.
Yeah, honey turns marijuana into heroin. That seems like a pretty big leap.
Yeah.
I just want to know how you saute. Do you put it in a pan and just
butter?
Put a little butter in the garlic on? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I don't. What little I know about marijuana cooking is you kind of have to cook marijuana in a certain way to extract the THC and stuff. But
the essential oils, if you will, Josh.
But who knows? I'm no expert.
Your Josh is more of a meth cook.
Originally, Young had wanted the sides swapped on this album, so the final 3 tracks to be first on the album, but his producer David Brooks convinced him to change it. Later on, he said he regretted that, but the 8-track and cassette versions have the sides swapped, and now thanks to the beauty of technology, you can listen to it any goddamn way you want to. So.
That's right.
Science.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the short and sweet of it. It's jumbled up with a lot of the other albums. What did you guys think of On the Beach? One of you go first. I don't care who.
Matt, you go first on this one.
All right, I'll go first. Well, I love Neil Young, and I didn't know any of these songs. I didn't even know this was an album. I never saw the cover of it, never heard of the title. It's kind of interesting, because going into this podcast, my thought was always, I love Neil Young, and my knowledge of Neil Young was basically the albums that we've covered already. Tonight's the Night I knew of, but I didn't really know the album that well. And then, my knowledge of Neil Young drastically falls off, right?
Right.
I knew some songs here or there. I picked up on some Neil Young stuff in the 2000s, but there's this huge span of, couple decades that I just didn't know anything about. And it's kind of interesting how it starts really here. And it starts with Neil Young's, all the stuff that you're talking about in his life, with his, the deaths of his friends and kind of the place that he gets into. So it's interesting to know that about him. And as far as this record goes, I really like this. This was it was nice to listen to a Neil Young album that I was not familiar with, that came out around the time of the stuff that I do love from Neil Young. And I think this is very strong. I was lukewarm on Tonight's the Night. I was a little left wanting more there. I still think that maybe I would like that more if I listened to it more. But this was great, and I loved the second half of the record, those acoustic songs. I think On the Beach in particular is probably my favorite song on the record. It's long at just over 7 minutes, although not as long as Ambulance Blues, which is 9 minutes, which is another great song. But these are slow, sad. This is a melancholy kind of sound that you get. And I think Neil Young's doing a couple of things on here. With On the Beach, you're kind of getting a mix of a really interesting, it's almost like a blues song. It's got this bass, this underlying bass that's going throughout, and it's got some very slow guitar solos, which are very atmospheric. It's very melancholy, and it's just so cool. I could listen to that song. It's a great song to listen to at night. Actually, that whole side of the album's a nice nighttime album. Nighttime kind of sound for me. And Ambulance Blues just seems very. Yeah, very raw Neil in terms of emotion. I mean, I definitely hearing the rawness, not so much musically, but he's just, you can tell he's hurting. I didn't know a lot of the context. I mean, I kind of knew about the deaths of some of his friends and stuff, and then from the last time that we covered him, how we were saying he was in a dark place, and you can hear that on this record too. But the first side's got some more it's got some upbeat stuff. It starts off with Walk On. That's kind of like an upbeat song. That sounds like it's almost kind of well, we need to move on and make things better. And it's, him trying to pick himself up and trying to, dust himself off and try to make things better as they go on. I really liked Revolution Blues. I thought that was a cool rockin', that might have been the most rocking song on here, the most raw rocking song, here. And it's just got a really cool guitar part. Really like the tone of the guitar that he's playing with here. I like the banjo for the turnstile, kind of like the old timey banjo. Yeah. That's raw Neil Young voice. It's kind of I could see people not liking that because it's not. I don't think that's an aesthetically pleasing musical number. It's very off key, it's the banjo's it seems like it's out of tune, and it's vintage Neil Young voice. But
that's when I noticed his voice too.
Yes, and that's the purposeful. It's very stripped down, so it's his voice is up front. And Vampire Blues was a cool little bluesy song about, I don't know, probably sucking oil out of the, he's getting this politics
about murdering people in LA is what that song clearly was about. Lyrically.
Is that what it's about? I heard it as
celebrities in particular,
sucking blood from the earth. So I was oh, that sounds like oil. See, even when I think I know what lyrics are, that's why I don't listen to them, because I'm an idiot when it comes to deciphering them anyway. But
you're idiot wind.
Yeah, exactly. So I really liked it. I didn't like it as much as the other, I think Harvest, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, and After the Gold Rush are all better than this. But this is a nice find, and it's got some that great combination of some rocking stuff. Although it's not, Neil Young does heavier stuff for sure. This is his more rocking stuff, but God, that second half is just kills me. That's just such a great. The more I listened to that, the more I liked it, and so yeah, big thumbs up. I love Neil.
You know what, Matt? I'm going to clean a stack right now because I jumped. You're 100% right. I was for some reason I was hearing you say. I was hearing you talk about Revolution Blues, even though you're talking about Vampire Blues.
I started talking about Revolution Blues, and
yeah.
then I went to Vampire
And
Blues.
Vampire Blues is absolutely about the oil industry. So you
Okay.
got that right. Yeah,
All
no,
right.
it is. Yeah. So I'm sure someone's like infuriated 30 seconds ago, so I'll clean that stack. But yes, Revolution Blues is the one where he's basically like, it almost sounds like he's like going full like Charles Manson in that one.
Oh,
like,
really? Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's definitely about LA and like not wanting to be in LA anymore, which is yet another parallel with David Bowie, which we're going to talk about.
Well, and that song, I got sucked into the music because that was, I felt, the best rock and roll song on the record, so which I really liked. So I didn't go in much into the lyrics on that.
Yeah, and Revolution Blues was inspired by Charles Manson.
It makes sense because
he
it's
actually
pretty,
met him too.
Yeah, it's pretty frantic.
Yeah.
Like when you hear it. So, yeah, this one's an interesting. I've always known On the Beach as the album that people always use as the example of that Neil Young. You know, he does something and then he fucks with the record company because, you know, he throws out. And that's how I've always known this album, because I always know that he likes this album. And some people have always wondered, like, does he like it because it's the album where he kind of thumbed the eyes at the music industry, or does he like it because he feels like it represents his best work? And I can absolutely see in listening to this album why he thinks it represents some of his better work, because it's not as depressing and stark as some of the other albums were. This is almost like he's singing about heavy, intense stuff, right? But he's singing about it at times, especially on the back end, from more of a like hopeful spot. Even
the
like
back end is hopeful
in some ways, like in the sense that it's like I mean, yes, Ambulance Blues is basically him doing like a post-op while living in the 70s, right? So I'll put that one to the side. But I like Motion Pictures is, I mean, it's clearly about his marriage or his relationship, but I don't think of it as a sad song necessarily. It's almost like a eulogy, but like a I'm grateful you. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's just because when you hear Tonight's the Night, it was such a depressing album. I mean, it was like the end of the road type depressing. This strikes me more as like your normal Neil Young poignant social commentary, but the fact that he's punching back here leads me to believe that he's kind of found some more life, whereas in Tonight's the Night, it just seemed like he'd kind of given up, you know? Here, like, and you know what I mean? You got to have energy to have this level of a take. I mean, it's also interesting to hear how he's still beefing with Leonard Skinner, because in the first song, it's still mentioned, you know? And I'm like, I didn't realize he wrote so many songs about Leonard Skinner, but like, it's still there.
What did he say? I didn't catch the lyric. Do you know?
It's like, it's just another retort to like, I'll have to pull up the exact lyric, but like he writes another one where it's clear he's talking to Leonard Skinner again. I'll pull it up after you're talking, Josh, and bring up the exact wording so I can do it. But in terms musically, this album, it's very Neil Youngish in the sense that sometimes his voice can grate, you know, as Matt said, and on this one it grated a little bit more than it normally does for me. I thought the album opener was really interesting because it's almost like as much as Neil Young does like a standard rock song, you know, in terms of the aesthetics of it. It really stands out for being less ragged than a lot of the stuff we've been listening to recently does, less raw, but then he immediately retreats back into that sort of raw, more ragged sound along the way. There's a ton of instrumentation on this album. Like, I think Matt brought up some of it, but there's that electric piano. I heard banjo. I heard, obviously the traditional. There's fiddle, I think, on Ambulance Blues. Am I correct about that? I wrote down.
Yes. There's like a violin thing going on there.
Yeah, I wrote down what I heard, and those were the things that jumped out. It feels like there's a lot of people playing on this album because there's instruments that you recognize, but they're not always played. You know how artists have a signature in terms of what they sound like when you hear a certain, like this didn't have as much of a signature. Like the way the guitar and the bass and the drums are being played, it almost feels like it's different people. And based on what you said, it kind of was at different points, right?
Yep.
So yeah. I would say right in the middle for me on this one. I don't know how much re-listenability this one has, but it's really interesting to see Neil Young's journey to the 70s, because we've done the whole thing, right, from 70 to here in terms of studio albums, right? I don't think we've missed a single one, have we?
From the 70s?
Yeah, from the 70s.
I mean, not that we got those live albums, right?
I was going to
Never
say
Sleeps.
studio albums.
There's an album from 1975 called Zuma.
But we wouldn't have missed
Yeah.
that yet.
Yeah,
because
that's
we're not
not
there
out
yet.
yet.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Gotcha.
Yeah, so we've heard the totality of it. And yeah, it's been very interesting to see him go from kind of like, younger, he's still a young man here, but younger, member of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, kind of to big star to, having lived a heavy life, up to this point, and now kind of figuring out what the next stage is going to look like, almost like a midlife type narrative. But at this point, he's probably not even out of his late 20s, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
There's my initial takes. I want to jump back in as you guys talk, but that's my first thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of similar thoughts to both of you guys. I really like this album also. I think I came to the realization listening to this, side by side with the Blood on the Tracks, is that I like Neil Young more than Bob Dylan. I think I don't know if that was kind of the hot take I was gonna say. I think
that's not super hot.
Yeah.
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Neil Young and Bob Dylan are maybe thematically similar. They both kind of come from that country rock background. I mean, Dylan's also folk, but I think lyrically sometimes they cover the same ground. But I really like what Neil Young does musically more. Like you guys said, there's a lot of different instruments in this. There's also, you guys mentioned the banjo and the guitar and things like that. And the electric piano. There's also the dobro. You've got a steel guitar on here, pedal steel, things like that as well. And so I really like Neil Young's ability to, right from the get-go, he has this kind of electric side to him, and more hard rocking side, and then he goes to like this more classical, almost like Americana country side. And I really like how he's able to move between those easily, almost always seemingly splitting them up on the album, like distinctly, not kind of back and forth always. And then and both, I've learned to appreciate the kind of countryside more with what he does with that, and I always seem to gravitate towards his electric stuff, and he is able to do both of those seamlessly, and that's what I really like about this. And this album is no exception. The front half or the front album is electric and more harder rocking. You've got those great blues songs and these great guitar parts that are really like staticky and like jerky almost in Vampire Blues. And then he has and he's able to like almost like there's like some like vibration to it or something and See the Sky About to Rain. And he just brings this good energy, even though it's negative energy. His albums, even though this is a dark album, it doesn't bring me down. And I feel like I still get something and enjoy it musically, even if I don't necessarily pay attention to the lyrics as much. So you've got that opener, Walk On, which is a great opener. It's got good energy, and then it kind of goes a little bit darker as you go in terms of tempo and the blues songs, and like Matt said, the guitar is just really slow and like drags it out in like a cool way, and blues songs are obviously about blues themes and loss and darkness, and he brings that on this album. And then the B-side or the flip side of the last three albums are all that kind of classical country and slow, melancholy, meandering, not in a bad way though, songs, and the harmonica also on Ambulance Blues. He uses the harmonica like almost as a slow harmonica and as its own solo instrument, and I don't think I've heard that before on up to this point on the show. So yeah, this is kind of was a bright surprise, and I enjoyed going on this journey. I mean, in his life, it's probably been kind of up and up, and this is kind of like the down part part, with these dark albums, or at least, I mean, he's always kind of had success, but in his personal life, maybe he might feel that way. And I just like what he brings musically, and I am interested in his journey, and he makes me interested in the music. So.
No, and I think you bring up a good point about his, he can do like a hard rockin' song really, really well. Like he's they called him the godfather of grunge, right? Like that was, kind of part of the person that influenced a lot of that sound, or at least some artists, I know Eddie Vedder loved, that was one of the best things ever, by the way, is when they played on the VMAs together. They played Rockin' in a Free World with Pearl Jam and Neil Young, which is awesome. Like that was, if you ever see that, that's a great performance. But Neil can bring it, plays and he's such a great guitar player, whether he's doing electric or acoustic. And on here, I really like the acoustic stuff that he's doing as well. But
I can always hear that performance in my head, by the way, because it's like the jarring of like Eddie Vedder and like Neil Young's voices together, because like we got 1,000 points a lot, whereas like Eddie Vedder's like singing much lower, so
it's great, but then he does, and then Neil Young does the the acoustic stuff, the folky, Americana kind of almost country, in some places really well too, and he's got that distinct voice that I know can be off-putting for people, but I love it. And he's a genuine dude, man, and he's just very, very talented. So I'm not going as far. I think I still like Dylan better. I think Dylan's got, I think he's got better output than Neil Young does, as far as I'm aware of anyway. But no, I've always really liked him, and I think that he can cover a lot of ground and do it very well. And he actually there was an album that was just released, a live album from 1970 at Carnegie Hall. This is like a thing that's happening now, is like they're discovering these, these recordings that were done by these artists in the 60s and 70s, and it's like stuff that you've never heard of, but it's just him with an acoustic guitar, and he plays a lot of the songs from the albums that we've covered, and just him and acoustic guitar, and they sound great, and he's special.
Yeah, although I don't know if I like this one as much as you guys did, because to me this is the weakest one. And that's all relative, because it's a good album still, but I don't know if this one spoke to me. I mean, I don't know if I want to listen to Tonight's the Night because of how emotionally raw it is, but it spoke to me in terms of connecting with the feeling, and Harvest speaks to me in a different way. Just the quality of the songs and the diversity of the song. I don't know what it is. There's just it's just the perfect emotional tenor at different times, mixed with probably, in my opinion, in this period, the tightest songs that Neil Young wrote, structurally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the early stuff, with the guitar plugged in a little bit more, speaks to me in a different way, sort of musically, because it juxtaposes with the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And that's what Neil Young did. He was the different sound in CSNY, right? And this is sort of more like a stripped down Neil Young, which it totally makes sense as to why that, in particular for you, Matt, would connect, because I know your taste, right? And it's going, a little bit more into your taste. It's dovetailing a little bit more away from my taste in some ways, but it seems to resonate with Josh, who sometimes leans even more harder into like what I would call my taste too, So that's the great thing about guys that write, so many different songs and are chameleons. They can find you where you're at. So.
Well, I still think those other albums, with the exception of Tonight's the Night, are better than this too. But this is just, I really like this because, like I said, it was kind of discovering another album from this era that was really good, And this is what I was kind of hoping Tonight's the Night would be more like this, and that's why I was kind of like, and like I said, I only listened to that once, but I was definitely, I think I was expecting more with that, which has kind of led to my little bit, but disappointment. So,
I think. I was going to say, I think, on all of these albums, Neil Young albums, there's always like one or two songs that are really good. And I agree with Matt. I like those other albums more that we've talked about, but this is still consistently good output from him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but he's still in a little bit of a dark place, but it does seem like he's digging out a little bit. I just hear the songs differently than I did on Tonight's the Night.
He's on the beach now.
Well, there's a part of me that wonders if he picked that on purpose, because kind of like I'm surviving.
like forcing himself to get a little bit more positive.
Yeah, like this album, I'm on the beach now, as opposed to, Tonight's the Night. It's like basically it looks like he's performing, half off his ass. Yeah, like, I mean, it's like, it looks like the scene, right? Whereas this is like, I don't know. I'm only speculating. So it's just simply, me guessing, but.
Well, part of the album cover is a car buried in the sand, as if it crashed in there. So,
but
dichotomy.
Like, it could also be humorous, though. You know what I mean? Like I crash landed at the beach. So it's an interesting title, isn't it, for an album like this? And it doesn't seem
It's not very rock and roll.
Well, but Tonight's the Night and Harvest and Rust Never Sleep. They kind of give you an idea what the album is, but On the Beach, you know what I mean? It doesn't really jive with what this sounds like. So there has to be something to that. Yeah. So we might have to clean that stack. So yeah.
The one more fact I thought was interesting is that Rick Danko and Levon Helm of the band were both on Revolution Blues on this. And,
really?
Yep.
Wow.
And Levon Helm also played drums on See the Sky About to Rain. And Crosby was on rhythm guitar on Revolution Blues, and Nash played the electric piano on the beach.
Oh shit! So they all were part of those musicians that we heard. Yeah, but that makes sense because there is a lot of different guitar sound on this, and so they all have their distinct styles.
Yeah, the band is definitely another. Like, I'm surprised that some of those guys in the band didn't play on Walk On, because that seems like that's a very the bouncy kind of nature of the band.
Yep.
So I love all that stuff. So it's great to it's you can hear dribs and drabs of it throughout this.
Yeah, it's cool too. It's cool, and they just kind of all hang out and like play together, and they're into each other's music and things. I like that vibe.